get it. I'm f- I'm f- I have a frozen image.
But you can't see me.
I can see you perfectly. I can hear
So
you perfectly.
so I think it will work. I think you know the way you look. No, you just see a painting. Or you just see a painting of yourself.
That's correct, and not a
Ah,
particularly nice one.
no, you look perfectly here on this side of the
Okay.
channel.
All right.
Yeah, looking forward very much. Thank you very much for doing this. I'm a huge fan of your playing, and look forward to talk to you a little bit today.
Great.
Yeah. So maybe you can tell us a bit about the early years when you came up, learning how to play the piano, and how you eventually got into jazz, and your early years in New York as a jazz piano player. Maybe we can start there.
Well, I was 20 years old when I arrived in New York, and I'd been a professional already for 5 years.
Hmm.
And when I arrived in New York, I arrived as a pianist, but I had also played bass for almost 10 years.
I heard that.
In,
Yeah.
in fact, when I arrived in New York, the first group that I sat in was the Jimmy Jufrey Three,
Mm.
and I played bass, and I was actually offered the gig. But
That
because
was.
of kind of complications in my life, it didn't happen. But I've always thought about that time and
Sure.
wondered, because the next group that Jimmy Jufrey had
Hmm.
was with Steve Swallow and Paul Bley,
Hmm.
and really avant-garde.
Hmm.
And he told me that night I sat in with him that he was looking for players that were composers. So anyway, then the 60s, basically, I was in the studios
Hmm.
for several years, and then I finally, I didn't want to do that unless they were my sessions. So around 65, I joined a comedian named Jackie Leonard. I was with him for a year, and then I left him and I joined Bobby Darin for 3 years.
Hmm.
And with Bobby Darin, he gave me the album Dr. Dolittle, which I arranged and conducted. That was 67, 68. Then I did the first album for the folk singer Melanie. I did 4.5 albums for her ultimately. And I also, in that time, late 60s, I did my first film, which was The Paper Lion.
Hmm. And can I ask, that was the like Jimmy Jeffrey was playing the clarinet and the saxes,
Yeah,
and Joe Pass was playing. Jim
Jim
Hall
Hall.
was playing the guitar, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you must have been
No,
a pretty good bass
I,
player.
well, I heard that group when I was 17 years old
Hmm.
in Massachusetts at Storyville at George Weins Club in Boston.
Hmm.
And that was a mind blower. The bass player was Ralph Pena.
Hmm.
So it's the same group that's from the CD that I have, the Jimmy Jufrey.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that one.
But
And later on,
it wasn't particularly avant-garde yet. It
that's
was
right. Yeah. Hmm.
still melodic and harmonic, although Jimmy Jufrey was changing the structure of some of his songs,
Hmm.
so they became uh, more improvised.
Hmm.
It was very interesting.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. It still is to listen to. Yeah. Hmm. And was there any like when you started playing the piano? I assume it was classical in the beginning, but then you discovered jazz. Was it learning by doing, by listening to other players how to do the jazz on the piano?
Well, yes, I started classical piano playing when I was 7,
Hmm.
and I studied until I was 18.
Hmm.
Um, but around the age of 12, two things happened. I started playing jazz sheet music,
Hmm.
specifically George Shearing, I remember it was I Remember April. Uh, so my interest in jazz began, and I also knew at age 12 that music was going to be my life.
Mhm.
So from the age of 12, I continued on and I was doing jazz and studying classical music. But jazz studies were mostly by ear,
Mhm.
listening to, well, my first hero was George Shearing, then Dr. Billy Taylor, then Oscar Peterson, uh, then Horace Silver. And in the meantime, uh, Fats Waller was in there
Yeah.
because in high school I had two people who were influencing me, and one was influencing me towards Dixieland
Mhm.
because his father actually played in a 20s Dixieland band, and in fact through high school he was still playing alto sax. And uh, the other musician was leading me in a more modern direction, past Horace Silver into more contemporary things.
Mhm.
So I was just absorbing all of that. And at the same time, my listening habits tended to go from Bach through medieval music like Leonin Perenin or Leoninus Pereninus, um, to Russian composers, particularly Stravinsky.
Mhm.
And then that led, when I got to the 60s, I started listening to John Cage and Earl Brown and
Yeah.
so Edgar Varese. I was always a conglomerate of, of many different styles of
Mhm.
music that interested me.
Mhm.
Then I started as a player, I started putting them all together.
Yeah, you did. Yeah. What I would
That
like
was
to know
fun.
is what I would like to know is I love the way you play diminished chords and resolve them to the one or four or whatever it might be. Then is that something the classical composer already did, or was it was it something that came much later? Do you know that by any chance?
Well, it's it's something that I do.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think analytically about that.
Hmm. It's just natural habit.
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Hmm. Okay, let's see. And was composing always a strong part from the early years because you liked all the other composers? You wanted to be one
Yes,
yourself?
yes.
Hmm.
I was always writing
Hmm.
from, well, as I don't remember how much I wrote as a teenager. I do have early compositions. Well, yes, I remember a composition that I wrote because the high school that I went to was the number 3 high school in the country. And the senior and junior and senior years of high school had music theory courses that were the equivalent of college.
Hmm.
So you actually, in order to graduate your senior year, you had to write a piece for orchestra
Okay.
and conduct it.
Hmm.
So I do remember doing that. Henry Lasker was the name of the teacher, and it was a really interesting time because the Donald March, who was the excuse me, was the orchestra leader, and I was playing bass, double bass in the orchestra.
Hmm.
And when I wasn't doing that, I was going through all the percussion stuff because I loved reading snare drum
Uh-huh.
and all that, timpani and all that. But we were doing music. We were doing Beethoven symphonies, Mozart symphonies, Bach, Brandenburg concerti, and so it was a pretty advanced high school.
Was that already also preparing you for movie scores and things that you did later on, in a way?
Well, I would say yes, but
Mhm.
of course I had no idea. I one of the things that I thought about at some point was what was the common denominator regarding all of the aspects of music that interested me,
Mhm.
and the answer was sound. It wasn't specifically melodic or harmonic, but
Mhm.
just the like Edgar Varese, the sound that he made, Stravinsky, what each of the composers. So
Mhm.
sure, it was preparing me. Yeah,
Mhm. Can you talk a little bit about there's a clip on YouTube that shows live at Dante's. You're playing
yeah,
with Sue Sims. You remember that? Was that a
sure.
week? Was that a week long engagement or just the one gig? Or can you?
I think it was several days
Mhm.
because we had been we must have been playing for several days.
Mhm.
I mean, that was a hot group, and we were definitely playing together.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, interesting background here. My first wife, Patty, was Zoot Sims' cousin.
Ah, there you go.
So I was part of the Sims family for 5 years.
Ah,
But that group, that
it's killing.
with
I listen from time to
Berghoff
time.
and
Yeah,
Larry Bunker,
Larry
yeah.
Bunk. Yeah. Mhm. Was that the kind of thing you guys just went in and Sue decided what tunes you're gonna play, or you rehearsed, or you remember any of those
Well,
details?
I see. I don't remember really specifically rehearsing,
Hmm.
so that's why I'm saying it must have been an engagement that was several days.
Hmm.
Zoo picked the tunes.
Hmm. On the trail, for example, like very much.
Well, there's a tune. I think it's the first tune that he plays, and nobody knows what that tune is.
Hmm.
And I traced it down, and what it is it's called the opener,
Hmm.
and it was written by Al Cohn for
Hmm.
the Al Cohn Zoot Sims duo.
Hmm.
And Zoot is not playing the melody; he's playing the second tenor part.
Uh-huh.
But it sounds so musical. It sounds like that's the melody
Hmm.
because he does ba-da-ba-doo-da, ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But the melody is da-da-da-da-da-da-da. That's the
Hmm.
melody.
Hmm.
Da-da-da-da-da-da. That's the harmony part. But the
Okay.
way Zoot plays it, it just sounds like the melody.
Hmm.
Fabulous. But it took me a long time to find out the answer to that tune,
Hmm.
because I think you'll see on the DVD, at least on one DVD presentation I have from Europe, um, it just says something like Zoot's opening tune.
Hmm. Yeah, that was so swinging and so in the moment. Everything there on this concert that is videotaped is really a treasure to watch over and over. It's everything at the right time there. Really admire that.
I think for me, in my teenage years, I spent several years listening to Oscar Peterson, and and when my lyric partner Gene Lees, many years later, was writing a book on Oscar, and he said, "Well, how do you feel about Oscar?" And I said, "It's the will to swing." And he said, "And that's the title of my book." But
That really
that,
captures it.
that
Yeah.
okay, the Dante's moment
Hmm.
is a perfect example of that. It's not all of the concept of how I play or what I want, how I want to make music,
Hmm.
but it's very deliberate when that kind of thing happens. And then suddenly you've got Berghofer and Bunker, and you have a chemistry that's going on between you
Hmm.
that's irresistible.
Yeah, it is.
And they all want it too. So that even makes it, now you've got a whole trio that wants the same thing
Mhm.
and they want to play in the pocket. Wonderful.
Yeah, and every one of you guys is so ready to give something or to add something or hold back, and it really serving the music, and it flows so naturally on this very night that is taped. Yeah, thanks, man. Beautiful. Can you talk a little bit about the 100 Fingers series that was in Japan that you were invited?
Sure.
That it's a
Sure. Well,
fun thing that I observed from the far.
well, think
world.
about this. 100 Gold Fingers was made up of 10 American jazz pianists.
Right.
Not always men, but mostly men, of course. But we did have Marion McPartlin.
Uh-huh.
We did have Toshiko Akiyoshi.
Mhm.
And I can't remember her name. She was on the first tour. But what's interesting about this is piano players don't get to hang out with each other.
Right.
So 100 Gold Fingers was really pretty interesting.
And you guys could collaborate spontaneously, or was it a fixed plan before you went to Japan that you will join Gene Harris, or that you will play solo? Or
No, that it seems to me Takawi Shizuka was the entrepreneur. It seems to me that he put that together
Mhm.
while we were there.
Okay.
He may have thought about it before the tour started,
Mhm.
but yeah, he put me with Gene. And I still have the video of that. I love that duo. I also did duo with Monty Alexander,
Mhm.
and I did duo with Harold Mayburn.
Mhm. I think Barry
I
Harris was
I
there
did
too on one
duo
year.
also duo with Kenny Barron.
Mhm.
I'm drifting now because I'm now thinking about something about bass playing.
Okay, let's go.
Monty Alexander and Kenny Barron
Mhm.
both play bass.
Still.
And we were in a club one night, and Junior Mance was deciding to play the piano, and he played the piano, and Kenny went over and picked up the bass and played with him. What I find interesting about that is that piano players that play bass, and there are many of them, accompany the bass a different way.
You guys pick different notes than a bass player would. Is it that, or?
I was playing in New York. I was playing bass at a club called Jilly's with a pianist named Phil Rudy, and we were opposite Bernie Nero. And then suddenly, and Bernie Nero had a bass player named Ben Tucker. Suddenly, Bernie leaves Jilly's to join RCA and become Peter Nero. And he recommends, because I sat in a few times, he recommends to the club that I take his place on piano.
Mhm.
So I did take his place on piano, and I took his bass player, Ben Tucker, and then that became the basic unit of my ultimately of my first trio. But my point is that when Phil Rudy played, he didn't play very much in the bass register. And one day I asked him why he didn't do that, and he said, "Well, that space is left open for you." And I thought, wow, that's pretty interesting because, of course, I'm growing up on Fats Waller and Tatum records,
Mhm.
in which that bass part is really pretty full all the time. Where does the bass player go? Now, suddenly, there's a whole freedom. And you can see from that point on, and Phil gets his concept from Dwight Mitchell, who was, I'd never even heard of him. I love his playing. But going more onto, say, Bill Evans, look at
Mhm.
what Bill Evans does with his left hand. and how he leaves all that space for the bass open.
Mm-hmm.
So that was major for me. That was early '60s that was happening.
Mm-hmm. And when did you write the cello quartet? The music for that group with cello and percussion, and was that you had a plan or a dream, or how did that come about?
I started rehearsing with Edgar Lustgarten in 1969.
Okay.
And I had a few tunes that I wanted to play with him. I wanted to do piano and cello literature, but I wanted it to be original music.
Mhm.
And those rehearsals with Edgar are what led to the cello quartet.
Mm-hmm.
My bass player at the time was Chuck DeMonico, and he was my bass player from the mid 60s for 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
So Chuck was always in on it. I knew that odd time signatures were also going to be part of it. So that's why Chuck was there, because he could do that. And then I picked Emil Richards because he could do that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I learned to do that with Don Ellis Band. So that
Mm-hmm.
was the group. Later on, I realized that basically the group was wood.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted everything to be acoustic. And that's how the group started. I went into a meeting with Herb Alpert at A&M Records, and I had about 5 ideas that I wanted to present to him. And I presented them, and he said, well, what do you want to do? And first, I said, I'd like to do the cello quartet. He said, go. And that was it, 1971. That was the first album.
Very unique sound. I love that sound very much that you composed and instrument. What do you say? Arrange, instrumentation, and everything. What would you call it if you would have to label it for someone who has no idea what we're talking about? Is it?
I find that very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
There was one reviewer at the time that called me the father of crossover, because the group contained classical elements and jazz elements.
Mm-hmm.
There was another reviewer that called me the father of New Age, which I don't appreciate. I do not. Crossover, I'll take.
Okay.
So I think crossover is a good.
Mm-hmm.
If you need, excuse me, if you need a category.
Mm-hmm. Another topic I would like to hear a little bit something is the way of playing solo piano. What is another thing that I adore when I listening to you. Is that something that you had like a plan how you want to sound, or it evolved over the years by playing solo at the bar, at the restaurant, at the jazz club, and how do you approach being there all by yourself, having to cover everything from the rhythm, melody, harmony, everything? Is that
Well, yes, is the answer to your question. It is something that evolves.
mm.
First of all, you've got 88 keys to deal with, and I use all of them. And and depending upon what piano you're playing, most of the 88 keys work.
Yeah, let's hope for that.
But think about this: you have the entire universe in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
There isn't another instrument that can do that. So you have the entire harmonic series, starting with the bass
Mm-hmm.
all the way to the top. And as solo playing evolved for me, I got more into thinking about sound and clusters and kind of hand positions that I could refer to as sandwiches,
Mhm.
which were in a way were not, you couldn't analyze them. I mean, I could think about somebody mentally trying to figure out what I'm doing
You
and
mean like
actually
a you mean like a
it's
chord symbol or something for that, or?
no, it isn't not
Mhm.
chords. It's clusters
Mhm.
and say you're doing like a scale pattern on the white keys, and then you can use the black keys on top of that, and then you do it all together.
Mhm.
Or you take a chord where, well, let's say you're doing a C minor 13th chord, but you're just taking a C, D, E flat, F, and G, and the other notes, B flat, A, G in the left hand, and you just start running all that kind of stuff
Mhm.
together. And that's more like a mode than it is a chord
Mhm.
concept.
Mhm.
And I used to do a lot of that in the 60s at a club called Bonesville, where I met Don Ellis. And I used to just be experimenting with
Is
those kinds.
is that the time where I heard something of your work where there is with a tape recorder something playing back
Yes,
and the elbows on the keys and that kind
yeah.
of was it that time
Well,
we're talking about?
you're close with the elbow, but it isn't an elbow.
Okay,
Everybody thinks it is. Now I'm going to tell you what it is. It's the forearm. That's
forearm.
correct. Now I'm going to tell you where it comes from. It comes from the Charles Ives
Oh,
Concord Sonata Movement 2,
okay.
where he had actually a piece of wood made
Hmm.
that that had cutouts for the black keys and everything,
Hmm.
and actually, I guess you put it on the keys and you play along with it. I've never actually seen how it was used, but that's
Hmm.
where the concept came from. It
Hmm.
was like the idea that you could have uh, a sound come from basically your wrist to close to your elbow
Hmm.
in just one splash.
I love that. Yeah, I love that.
And also it comes from Edgar Varese.
Hmm. Very cool. Something else that just popped into my mind is Jazz Visions on TV, your jazz series. Can you mention what that was and how long it lasted? And there is and yeah, maybe an anecdote or something.
Well, I got that series. That series was produced by Jack Lewis, who was a producer that I knew for a long time. I don't know if Jack is still with us. I haven't seen him in about 20 years, but it went on for several weeks.
Hmm.
And I remember I was doing a segment on Duke Ellington. So I was doing all Ellington charts for my segment.
Hmm.
And then somebody dropped out. I don't remember, maybe Mulligan. And Jack came to me and said, I want a second Ellington show. So we did two Ellington shows.
Hmm.
Ultimately, I wrote a main theme for that whole thing.
Okay. Where you
And I
opened with that you opened the show with. Or...
I didn't open the show, but all of the promo was going to use this theme.
Hmm.
And this theme was going to be in 5 different formats, including Laserdisc. I thought this was gold, for me. This is my moment. Here's this my hit record, and it never took off. It's kind of an obscure uh, little concert series that a few people know about. That's it. I've
Yeah,
never had anybody bring this up in an interview.
but the crowd was roaring there. It was
Yes,
yes, I
yes,
saw
no,
that.
it was done by Lorimar, and
Hmm.
it was all live. Yeah, it was wonderful.
It was wonderful.
I got to play, there's another instance of two pianos. I got to play with McCoy Tyner.
I'm referring mostly to that is on tape too. That I saw that. Yeah, with Stanley Clarke on bass and Peter Erskine. Yeah, and it's amazing you're playing there. The way you play and the way you communicate, and always the colored socks. I must say, I really appreciate it.
It goes on and on. I have there's a very dear woman in our lives who's a real mover and shaker in this town, and she's about to turn 100. And she has basically said to me, every time she comes to hear me play, she expects to see the Red Sox.
The pressure is high, huh? Always changing the socks, different colors. Yeah, no, it's really your trademark too. I mean, besides the amazing playing. So that was played in LA or in New York or in the middle, or where was it recorded and played and staged, that show, Jazz Visions?
Lorimar was LA.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was probably a sound stage with a live audience. Mm-hmm. I don't remember, or a theater. I
it was remember. A rather huge place from what I've seen.
Could be.
Not a jazz hall, that's for sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And maybe some last words on maybe plans or wishes or things you haven't done, or maybe you discovered a new key on the piano. I have no idea.
Bösendorfer has found them all.
Bösendorfer.
Okay. With the big one, the Imperial.
How many more notes you have there?
9.
9
on the bottom. It's the biggest piano made in the world.
Talking about bass notes.
And nobody gets to hear those notes unless I'm playing, because when I'm playing that, I don't get to play the Imperial very often, but of course that's one of the first places I go with those last 9 notes. Mm-hmm. I did a solo concert in Milan, maybe 2008 or something like that, and that's what I got to play, an Imperial Bösendorfer. And
you were down there for 5 minutes, just having fun with the low notes.
Well, absolutely. Oh yeah. Well, it's the only time they're ever going to hear them, because no classical pianist is going to use them, because they're going to play down to the low A. Of course, what's different about the Imperial, there are 4 models. Mm-hmm. There's one model that only has 3 notes that open up, and that's the little block that's on the bottom of the keyboard. It lifts up, and there are 3.
Okay.
Oh, wait a minute. There are 3 different models. Okay, there are 3. There's another model, you lift it up, and there are 6. Now, on the model that are 9, there is no block. So it's just the low A on the regular piano is still a white key. And then there are 9 black keys from there on. So if you're playing along and you overshoot the low A, you're going to hit one of those notes. Wow. You have to, you got to really be thinking about what you're doing.
I found it very hard to differentiate those low pitches. Sometimes when I play with organ in a church, it's very, I mean, how do you use those low notes, like for a chord or just for an effect, or?
Yes, it's very difficult because of where they are in the overtone series. There's
I'm not sure if it's a D or a D flat. Could be anything.
That's correct. Yeah. If you use it in an octave, where you play an E flat, which would be E flat 1 on the regular piano, and the E flat below it, you may get some kind of relative sound. But the only thing that those 9 notes appeal to are the abstract notions that have come into my head through either John Cage or Morton Feldman or some of those people. Other than that, they aren't very usable in terms of doing tonal music
Yeah.
or anything else. They make a sound of their own.
Yeah.
But to get back to what's happening now, I have a new cello group, a quintet, and I am writing the music for the 50th anniversary of the cello quartet.
Mm. Very nice.
But in the process of putting the group together, because Emil Richards did so many different things, I had to replace him with two people. One that actually plays hand percussion and gongs and all that kind of stuff, and then another one that plays marimba.
Okay.
So
yeah.
it's basically the same sound, except that I've got two percussion.
So you wrote some new pieces that we will hear that you recorded.
Well, yeah,
or you will record.
Eventually, I've got 4. I've got 6. I'm working on the 7th one now.
Wow, looking forward to that.
And we have some interest in. There's a recording company that's interested in it, so we'll see. That's basically what I'm doing. Because of the pandemic, I haven't actually played very much. Although last year I did a concert for a group called Pianospheres.
Right.
And my trio was Bruce Foreman on guitar and John Clayton joined me on bass. And you can find this on YouTube.
I listened to it many times, believe me.
It's good.
Yeah, I love.
And the interview with Mike Lang is very good.
Right.
You may have seen that.
Yeah,
Mike,
I've listened to many times to the concert. Yeah, I love your solo piece there. I think Love Walked In.
No, it's called Arcades.
Okay.
Was it? Yeah, no, it's an original composition.
The solo piano. Okay.
Yeah, it's an in memoriam to Stravinsky, actually. But now that we're bringing this up, the interview with Mike Lang, we just lost Mike Lang last Friday.
You guys saw each other in the studios recording something?
I knew Mike for 55 years. I first hired him to be the pianist for Bobby Darin in the studios because I was conducting. And then in 1970, I wrote a ballet for George Balanchine, and I wrote a 2-piano score, and I hired Mike Lang and Ralph Gerson to play the 2 pianos. And I set it up in A&M Records Studio A because Balanchine was coming to California, and I wanted to show him that I could conduct the piece. I didn't even know what I knew what I was doing, and lo and behold, the third performance in New York, Robert Irving, the conductor, decided he wanted to do something else, so I actually did get to conduct the piece. So anyway, Mike and I went, it was a long relationship under many circumstances. I wrote a suite a few years ago called Many Moods of McCartney. It's a 3-movement work that uses 10 McCartney songs for 2 pianos, bass, and drums. And Mike was one of my pianists. Peter Beats was the pianist on 2 of the sessions, including the premiere in Asheville, North Carolina.
So Pianospheres, that was your last concert, public appearance playing jazz?
Yeah.
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 This was 21, or the concert was in 2021, right? I'm not sure.
It seems to me like it was a year ago because 2 years ago it was supposed to happen.
Okay.
And it got canceled because of the pandemic.
I see. And the cello quartet music, is that something that you see as as a composition that you would like to have on, like to record it and that's it, or is it something that you also would like to perform live for people?
I think, yeah, we will head towards doing something live.
Mhm.
I think that it would be more reasonable to look at some kind of a video
Mhm.
production of the group and some kind of a maybe a live performance that's videotaped,
Mhm.
because again, like the original group, this is all studio players.
Mhm.
So I mean, it isn't like you can start thinking about making a tour. It wouldn't be that. I
You
would
don't see it as that,
tend to,
huh?
I wouldn't tend towards wanting to do a tour
Mhm.
anyway at this point in my life.
Mhm. I see. Yeah,
But
but
yes,
it's
go ahead.
something like a chamber music in a nice
Yes,
hall like that. Like instead of a string quartet, you guys are playing your thing. Yeah. Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Looking forward to maybe discover that later. This new set of cello quartet music. I guess you have to drive your wife to the
Well,
doctor's appointment. Tell me.
yeah, she has an eye doctor
Uh-huh. Just
appointment in an hour and 10 minutes, so
mhm.
we're okay.
Okay. Yeah. Is there something we forgot to mention? I mean, on your website it says you played from anybody to anybody. This was in the studios, recording, conducting, touring, and anything in between. That with those big names,
I think I,
arranging.
touring. I think touring's the hardest part, but you know, playing and writing and conducting and all of that. I mean, I love that. I've done 29 film scores and I've
Mhm,
conducted them all. I've orchestrated them all, and
mhm,
I really love conducting, but I don't get to do that
mhm. But I mean,
very
it's
often.
a total different scene. How did you enter that Hollywood film music guys conducting, writing? I mean, Invictus with Matt Damon, I think it is. How did you enter that field? Was it something you slipped in, or you worked very hard to get in, or it's a
I
different hat than playing jazz?
I had an agent.
Hmm.
I remember that's how I got my first film, The Paper Lion.
Hmm.
And then that actually was in New York. But somehow from there, I ended up with Stanley Wilson at Universal. I mean, he was a producer.
Hmm.
And then he gave me an opportunity to do a film score. So
I see.
then it all kind of you know, goes on from there. We get to 1970, and Dave Grusin is being asked to do the music for All in the Family, and he's
Hmm.
not available.
Hmm.
And he recommends me. So
Hmm.
I didn't know anybody else had been hired, so I read the script and I wrote a tune.
Hmm.
And the tune ultimately became the closing theme of the show. So All in the Family became the first and actually the only show ever in television to have two themes.
Hmm.
So it's just, you know, the dots get connected a different way for each person.
Hmm. Right.
You're suddenly in a particular place, and the pieces suddenly fall in, or maybe you've got an agent and somebody calls and says, you know, I've got a film. We'd like your client to see it. But
Hmm.
there may be several people that they've called,
Hmm.
you know, go watch it, and they want to know what your opinion is. And
Composing on the piano, or can you compose without the piano, just sitting at the table with a piece of
I
paper?
can, but I can, but I don't like it. I mean,
Hmm.
I basically use the
Hmm.
piano, but the piano is what I use.
Hmm.
I don't relate to the general category of keyboards.
I think I never saw you play. Did you ever play the electronics Electronic.
Just Fender Rhodes.
Fender Rhodes. Yeah.
And I'll tell you, it's the only other one, or it's the only one of the electronic keyboards, because because with that instrument you can have a physical relationship, and that's one of the things that I really adore about playing the piano is the physicality of it. Same with the writing. I don't use a computer; it's all by hand. Because of the physical relationship between the pencil and the paper. I like all that.
And your favorite pianos? I mean, the keys, I guess, are different weighted. Like some are going much hard. Some pianos are much harder to play. Some maybe the keys go down much lighter. Is there anything something that you prefer on your piano at home, for example?
I have for many years I had a Blüthner, and that ended up at a friend's house. But since 2001, I've had a Yamaha C7. I like the action on the piano, and I wouldn't like to play action that's any heavier. This is a nice moderate action, and it's easy to execute, but it's not so easy that, I mean, you have to put something physical into the playing in order to get back something. So not a lot. I don't like, I did a concert. Oh, well, you asked me if Pianospheres was the last concert. No, it was not the last concert. The last concert was in June. This past June, I did a concert with Eddie Daniels, a quartet concert. And I got to play a 9-foot Steinway concert grand, and it was not an enjoyable experience because the action was just a little bit harder than what I was used to.
Too much resistance from the keys?
Well, if the action itself is harder, then that means you're going to have to put out that much more physical energy in order to play the instrument. So in sound check, I was playing the piano and I was finding that some of my very favorite licks to play on the piano, this piano wouldn't do it. And so, I mean,
time to improvise.
You're trying to make friends here. But there can be resistance.
And can be hurtful on the forearm too.
You know, I didn't even get there.
Okay.
There wasn't a single forearm in this concert.
Well said. Beautiful. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think you seem healthy and full of ideas still. Is it you're sitting at the piano every day writing and still into music as it used to be, right? So nothing that holds you back, just because the world is crazy a little bit. So. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Really appreciate it talking to you, Roger. It's been a dream of mine actually to finally have the chance to see you talking and in action, and I'm listening to your music a lot of times, as I mentioned, because it's really unique approach on the piano to me, and I look forward to maybe see those cello quartet. By the way, I'm the same guy that asked, where can I see that sheet music of cello quartet?
Yeah,
and maybe one day I will. Who knows?
maybe. Yeah. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. Yeah.
All right.
I wish you a good day and a lovely week, and so far.
Same to you.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Goodbye.